Okay guys, a quick overview about grids. This is for our conceptual image poster project. Because it's a poster and we don't have a ton of elements, we're not doing multiple pages of text and a lot of different images. We primarily focus on an image or two to convey our idea. Minimal content, headline, maybe a subhead, call to action. We don't have a need for an overly complex organization, but at the same time, even on a simple poster, using a grid will help us to divide up the space that we have available in a proportional manner, which ultimately creates a more pleasing composition, definitely feels better to the viewer as well. And it's not to say that you have to use one, it's just good to know how to if you do need to, okay? And this image here shows a particular type of grid called a modular grid. And it's called that because you have a series of modules set up here within this space. You can see that this is the actual page size. You have your margins here. And then within those margins, you have this field of organized space into these separate modules. So this is a module here, okay? And it's made up of four columns essentially, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows. So you would have 24 modules in this plane, okay? You can use those modules individually. As you see, you can use multiple of them to delineate space in different ways. You can use them here as a full column. You can use them as a spatial zone that incorporates 4 units or 4 modules here, or you can use them as 24 separate modules if you want to. Okay. You can see that these spaces here in between the modules, these are called gutters. Okay, and these are generally used for dividing elements, so you have that little bit of space between elements so they don't blend together. I mean, you can go over, obviously, as you see here, they've traversed the gutter to use a spatial zone of 4 different modules. Okay, so those are the kind of the main components here, and you can again use them in columns, you can use them in rows, you can delineate the space any way you want. And at the end of the day, you'll know that however the images are incorporated in that space, as long as they work within the grid, they're set up in a proportional manner to the space that's provided, okay? Which is nice. There are different types of grids, and again, it depends on the context. So a lot of books will incorporate single column grids. You'll see 2 column grids in a lot of publications, magazines, textbooks, for example. In those same magazines, you'll have multi-column grids. Okay, probably not something that actually this is applicable for even a poster. If you just want to make sure you're dividing your space up proportionally, you can definitely use a multi-column grid. It could work just fine. Some magazines will incorporate a combination of grids. They might have both 2 column and 3 column, or even 5 and 6 column grids. They might incorporate a modular grid, which we just talked about, which you can see is made up of all those modules here. And hierarchical grids essentially are just breaking up the space into zones where it's kind of basically composed of what are the kind of main components that need to be focused on, and then I'm just dividing that space up horizontally and working within those spaces based on the hierarchy of information that we have. Okay, so that's a very brief overview. Essentially what you're going to do is to create the grid, or to choose the right grid, you're going to assess the material. So for your poster project, you can use a very simple grid. You can use, like we said, a column grid. You can also use a modular grid. Now, modular grids seem to be the most complex, but they're actually really flexible and very usable. Okay, so ultimately, when you do incorporate a grid in whatever the context is, you have to decide, how much information do I have? How much text? How many images? Do I have illustrations? Is it a complex document where I'm showing a lot of information graphics? Things like that. Then we're going to have to use a more complex grid that allows us a lot of flexibility. Okay, so if you go into a page like this, I'm in InDesign right now. Okay, and for InDesign, if I just to make sure, it's very much like Illustrator, and I know a lot of people are more comfortable with Illustrator. If I go into InDesign here just to create a new document, I would just go to File, New, Document. Okay. And say I wanted to make an 11 by 17 page in our, poster orientation here, portrait orientation. I'm going to have margins of 0.25, because that's typically you're not going to want to go beyond that, because depending on the size, if you're printing it straight to 11 by 17, you'll need a border, and an even border all the way around might look good, so I would consider that. If you can go to a place that prints larger and you can print it to 11 by 17 and then trim it and have a full bleed, that's great too. So I could create that image there. I'm sorry, create that document, and that's essentially what I have done here. Just to reiterate though, when I go back to that, let me try this again. You don't want to have facing pages selected, as I don't here, because if you do have facing pages, you'll see what happens is I go here, and whenever I add pages, so it's different than artboards, and that in Illustrator you have artboards. In InDesign you have your page layout, because it's a page layout program. If I have facing pages, it's going to give me this kind of situation. And I don't necessarily want that for a single poster, right? If you're doing multiple pages, you would understand that obviously works better, or brochures, things like that. I don't need that, and I just need a single image here, single page, which is essentially what I have here in my primary document here. So 11 by 17, it has 0.25 margins. Now let's say I want to create a grid. You can do it a couple different ways. In Illustrator, you have a grid tool that you can use. I like using InDesign because it's very simple to use a grid. You can pull, in Illustrator, you could pull guides and put them in evenly and make a grid manually if you don't want to use the grid tool, because maybe you want to have actual gutters between them, which the grid tool in Illustrator I'm pretty sure does not have, okay? That you always want to make sure that your rulers are showing. So it'd be Command R or Control R to ensure your rulers are showing, okay? What I like to do actually is to set up my grid using the layout palette, or the layout, and then create guides. And so I just use my guides as the grid, okay? So if I go to my create guides here, the gutter is that space, like we said, between the modules or the columns and rows. And you can have it as wide or as narrow as you want. I'm gonna have it fit to the margins. And you can see as soon as I start adding rows and columns, let's start by columns, okay? I can have a very simple, for my poster, for example, I can have a very simple division of space, just like this, a 3x3 9 unit or 9 module setup might be helpful, because now I know that my space is broken up into even thirds here. So maybe I want 2/3 of my poster, focused on imagery, and maybe a little bit of type, and then there's some, call to action content down here, something like that. You can go more complex if you want to, and it's up to you. You can go, even something that seems really complex isn't necessarily as complex as you think. So if I go to something like this here, okay, I have all these modules, and it's like, wait, why do I need all this? Well, again, it just gives me more flexibility, because I could still break it down by, here you see a column, you see one column here, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or it can be, here's a column, here's a column, and here's a column, and all of a sudden I have 3 columns, okay? To illustrate that, maybe it would help to make a shape here. Oh, okay, let's not do that. I gotta create my guides first. I gotta hit OK on my guides. Sorry about that. Let's do this again real quick. Let's go 6 there. No, let's go 6 here. And let's go 11 rows. I think that's where I was. I gotta hit OK first. And then you can see that I can do a module. I can do 4 modules. I can do a whole column, okay? And let's put a simple color in there real quick. I can do, all of a sudden I have, instead of 6 columns, I have 3, okay? As you can see, divided up perfectly evenly here, okay? Etc. So, or I can do it in rows if I want to. I can have it, be 11 of these rows. I can have it be, divided up, and use this in any way, shape, or form I want. Okay, I can use multiple spaces here. Okay, if I want to divide it, that would almost divide the page, exactly in half. Although I would have it typically not go to the bottom of the gutter. I would have it there, and then this would be another division of space down here. It's not quite exactly in half, but you can see how you can use this in any way, shape, or form you want. Okay. And you can use as complex or simple as a grid as you want. Here I brought this famous poster. This is Armin Hoffman. This poster. It's just pulled it in, and it's not as long as it needs to be here. But we're working with what we have. you can see if I was gonna do a layout and create guides here just to illustrate, yes, I want to show those. If I can do a simple, I'm gonna make these a little bit smaller. If I can make a simple 3-column grid. Why are my grids not showing here? Come on. Oh, I'm not on the right page. Make sure you're on the right page. If I go to layout, create guides, and I can add, I'm going to make those smaller again. Okay, you can see that here, even with the simple, let's pretend this goes all the way to the bottom, a simple 3-column grid shows me how this space is divided. Okay, even with a very simple poster with a singular main image, your primary display type and your secondary stuff there, which is really just the logistical info, where and when. Okay, it can be a very simple grid setup. Okay, that same setup, if you wanted to have more complexity, you could add, you know, as many rows as you need. We used 11 rows earlier, and then we used 6 columns. You know, and again, we would change our information to make it work well, but you can see even in that more complex grid, it's essentially the same thing. Here I have this same column, okay, and then twice that over here. Okay, but now I have more flexibility if I had additional information and additional elements. Maybe if I wanted to rearrange this, so, you know, obviously it's aligning pretty much in, you know, on this same plane or the same axis as the type here, but I could move it around if I wanted to, and I could make the grid even more complex if I had to, you know. It just depends on, you know, how complex it needs to be. But it's essentially the same thing, okay? And, you know, so, sometimes grids, well, it's like same, and this is another Swiss poster, this is Josef Müller-Brockmann. You can see that it's clearly divided up. This is pretty simple, okay? But structurally, in the way this is built, is more complex than we may think, okay? If you look at this poster, they're essentially using this very large circle. Okay, they have a square built into their format here. Okay, let me do this. Let me lock this so it doesn't continue to do that. There's a square that they use to break up. They take a square. They take this plane here, this whole composition, and they make a square here. Okay, and they then take this large circle and they have it work, you know, halfway here. They break up the space halfway here and halfway here, okay? And that circle sits right at the halfway division marker, okay? They've bisected the square here and it touches right there on that edge, okay? And so that's where they've created just that first primary element. And that's also enabled them to decide, okay, how much room is going to be available down here for the typographic information. So if you see that square, let's lock this. And that square is divided in half this way as well. The axis that goes straight through the middle of this large circle also goes straight through the middle of this smaller circle at 90 degrees essentially. And then 90 degrees from there, you have this circle, and then 90 degrees there. From there, you have this circle. So it's an interesting formatting that doesn't necessarily use a complex modular grid, but you can see it is broken up into 3 columns of even space, okay, which is where this information fits. And then the rest of the image area is broken up in a way that makes sense compositionally and proportionally given those simple shapes that are being used, okay? Now, the key to a grid is use it as long as it is supportive to you. Do not let it dominate your design, okay? And my only complaint about sometimes, even with these beautiful Swiss posters, is sometimes the grid is so adhered to that, especially typographically, things like this tends to be a little tighter than I would personally want it. I would want to have some more room to open up maybe the line spacing and to clean this area up a little bit. Not to say these guys weren't capable of it, they definitely were. But let the grid work for you. You still have the control as the designer. The grid doesn't dominate your work, okay? So what I want you to do is to, after reviewing this video, I want you to, you know, this is just a simple search, poster grid graphic design. I want you to do some visual research on grids. And, you know, again, like we did with the conceptual imagery, always look and see it, you know, how other people are using grids and how those might potentially influence your work. Then I'm going to direct you to this site here, and I'm going to have you review this website. It's going to give you more of the same information we just talked about. and then you'll have a few questions to answer for part of your online hour, okay? That's it on grids. If you have any questions, let me know either before class or during class, and we'll go from there. Thanks a lot.